Sadly, Chael, I gotta admit I spend far too much time scouring the internet for trolls. So I know that you guys say you can't buy UFC 303 anymore. So guess what? Look at the graphic. We'll even save you $10. It's still available. What's up, guys? Welcome to a brand new episode of Good Guy, Bad Guy. I'm Daniel Cormier. That is Chael Sonnen. Chael P, you know what's crazy about this show and UFC 303 and speaking to the magnitude of it? One of our highest rated shows of all time, and literally all we did was guess. Neither one of us knew anything that was happening. We sat up here on Monday and we just threw out guesses. Maybe it's this. Maybe it's this. Maybe it's this. I look at the numbers the next day. We're over 200,000 people watched this thing in the day, Chael. We didn't know. We just guessed. Is that not amazing?
Daniel, I could have called Dana, whether he answered or not. But I could have called Audie. I could have called Conor McGregor. I didn't even try to do these things. And you want to know why? I don't necessarily want to know. I like the speculation. I'm with our audience. I think that the guessing is a little bit more fun. Look, when everything's done in hindsight, as we'll call it, not having a press conference created more press than the press conference could have. So at the end of the day, though that was not the designed result, Conor McGregor, once again, from a marketing standpoint, gets an A.
He absolutely gets an A. And guys, right now, as we stand, the fight is still on. As you saw, you can still order it on ESPN Plus pay-per-view and get $10 off. But while the focus, Chael, was what if on Monday, I want to talk to you about something a little different today. So Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler are still scheduled to fight on June 29th at T-Mobile Arena, UFC 303. But it got me to thinking, short notice, right? Because it would be short notice if something happened to where one of these young men could not show up there. How in the world do short notice fights come together is the general question for most people. They see a guy one day on the couch, the next day he's in training camp getting ready to fight. So it got me to thinking, how do they come together, Chael? I want you to explain to the people what happens when a guy that is headlining a massive card gets pulled and then someone has to replace him.
Well, and I'll tell you what, it's been different through history. If you want to back up all the way to 1993, they used to do a tournament format, and we needed a replacement for the first time ever in the final. So a guy named Steve Jenham, who had never competed before, steps in there and he wins. But an argument was made that, yes, Steve won because he's completely fresh, and the other gentleman he took on had 2 fights already that night. Fair argument. But now it comes about, where do you bring in the alternate, and how do you keep it even, if you can? So over time, I'm going to fast forward way ahead, but we started just having what's called a backup fighter. And the first one to ever do it was Volkov.
Yes.
And Daniel, I was there.
That's one thing I want to ask you. Actually, you just brought that up, and it popped in my mind. Chill. We don't have a backup fighter. We don't have an alternate. When in the world have we been in a place now with a fight as big as this when we didn't have somebody that the public knew was the alternate? Right now, we don't even have that. That, to me, is about as surprising as anything. Because you remember when Jones was going to fight Stipe in New York? They had the big man on standby, Pavlovich. When, like you're going to talk about Volkanovski. Or when Michael Chandler made his debut, he went to Abu Dhabi just in case Makhachev or Charles Oliveira didn't get it done. There's always a backup guy. Why in the world, Chael, do we not have a backup guy? Or if we do, why don't anybody know about it?
And I love that you asked that question. One of the things that I have disagreed with in the marketing department, and it's just an experiment, but I guess and speculate it would be helpful to announce the backup fighter. The UFC completely disagrees with me. Sometimes they'll bring somebody out at weigh-ins. You'll put your eyes on that person, and that's where it's revealed to you that they're even in place. For example, Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington, when they did it at Madison Square Garden, Luque weighed in. We didn't even know that he was licensed, and we didn't find out until that moment. The UFC does not want to take any focus off the ball that they plan to present. And I disagree. I think it's fun. I think the backup fighter is a coveted spot. So many times the backup fighter goes on to be the next opponent. He ends up getting the championship match. Daniel, generally speaking, if you're doing a feature match at 170 pounds, which in this case, Chandler versus McGregor is, generally speaking, on your main card, you will have another fight within that weight class where you could pull one of those guys to put in the backup spot. I don't know why we didn't do it here. I wish that we would. I like a backup fighter. I think it's coveted and should be looked after more.
You know, that's one worry. I think because of who Conor is, everything is different, right? Because not just anybody can go in there and fight him. You could say we could put another 170-pound fight on the card, right? I think Ian Gary is fighting Michael Venom Page on that night, I believe. If not, I think they're fighting each other. But it's like Conor McGregor is not going to just fight Ian Gary, or he's not going to just fight Michael Venom Page. You have to have a bit of notoriety. You have to have some cliche to you. Cowboy Cerrone maybe was not, or Cachet, sorry. Cowboy Cerrone was not the best fighter when he fought against Conor McGregor, but he was a big enough name. People knew who he was. People recognized Cowboy's name. Dustin Poirier wasn't the guy when he fought Conor in Abu Dhabi. He had lost his championship opportunity. He was on the buildup, but he's got enough name recognition that you could put him in there. It cannot be just anyone to fight Conor McGregor. So I think that plays a part in it. But I believe knowing who the backup guy in this case would be very vital. Problem is, it doesn't matter who the backup fighter is if the backup fighter is not stepping in to fight Conor McGregor. Because the backup fighter fighting Michael Chandler in the main event of UFC 303, it would probably be a great fight. But it's not going to be the fight that brings the eyes that they intend to have on that night. So, you know what's crazy to me? If they are to have to replace Conor Chael, I don't even know if Mike's in the main event. And how crazy a thought is that to you? If they have to remake a fight to headline UFC 303, do you think that 303 fight would still involve Michael Chandler, or would it be someone else?
Yes, the UFC, and again, I'm just going off of history, but they will do everything they can to preserve a card. So you take a guy like Chandler, who's working and training and planning on this. If they don't come through with their side of it, which is to bring the opponent they said, they take that very personal. And they will do everything they can to keep Chandler in that place. And I also feel confident in telling you, before any narrative gets started, this fight doesn't happen on this date. This fight does not happen. You will be more likely to Khabib and Ferguson re-signed again. That's a personal thought, but I'm going to make it for you. Daniel, on short notice fights, it's such a great opportunity. If you're willing and ready to do something that other guys aren't willing and ready to do, big opportunity presents itself. If you're within striking distance of your weight class, for example, it represents a real professionalism. If you always stay ready, you never have to get ready. I used to get called for backup fights all the time. And the one thing they knew is that I would say yes, and more importantly, that I could be on weight, that I would be ready. There wouldn't be that built-in excuse. I got a world championship fight opportunity, Daniel. I mean, you sit around as a little kid and you try to figure out, how am I ever going to get a world title opportunity? I got one against John Jones, what I later found out because 8 other guys had said no. Everybody else had turned it down, whether they didn't think they could prepare or get their licensing done or make weight class or show up in shape. Whatever the reasons were, I said yes, got a world title fight. I only share that story with you. There's massive opportunity to be ready.
There's a lot of chances to be had if you're prepared. But for me, I believe that short notice fights vary case by case. My conversation and the biggest example of this in my career was UFC 200 when I couldn't fight John Jones. And I remember when Anderson decided, Chael, that he was going to step in. I was so disappointed that when I realized I wasn't going to fight Jones, I went and drank a little bit of Gatorade, right? I had a bottle of Gatorade. My nutritionist was mad at me. He was like, you're going to mess up the weight cut because of the sugar. The added little bit was enough to make him go into a panic. And I remember Dana calling me on Wednesday night, and he goes, Daniel, he goes, Anderson's going to fight you. He said the weight's going to be 206, da-da-da-da-da. I go, come on, at least 209, right? Because now, hey, Chill, I tried to get an extra 3 pounds because my nutritionist had scared me so much on the sugar that I didn't know if I'd be able to get down to 206 because my mind had shifted, right? I was getting ready for the biggest fight of my life, and now I'm just sitting there getting told I'm going to fight another great, but on a day's notice, and I have to go and make weight. So ultimately, I went and started working. I made the weight barely, though, to make 206. It was so hard, but it was a lot of emotion tied to it. Granted, that's an extreme case. But I believe if a short notice opportunity is presented to someone, they'll never say no to fight Conor McGregor. But who's going to step up if it's Michael Chandler? Look, man, and the sad thing is, again, we're speculating. We are guessing. And it's almost like this conversation is taking on a tone that the fight's not happening. But right now, as we speak to you right now, this fight is on. And they're saying that while in most instances where there's smoke, there's fire. In this instance where there's smoke, there is no fire. And these guys still will fight on June 29th, Chael.
Daniel, I completely agree that this fight is going to happen. I mean, everybody gets to learn from past experiences. The UFC doesn't need a backup fighter for Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor is the one side you can always count on. He cut an interview out there with Joe Rogan with a leg that was broken in half. They're trying to usher him out, and he says, not so fast. The show must go on. I mean, you say what you want about Conor McGregor. You got to give him credit that he follows through with the things that he says he's going to fall through for, and not to mention, guys pull out of fights for really strange reasons that never make it to the public. But one of those big reasons is the guy doesn't want to beat the scale. Somewhere along the process, this is too hard. I'm out. I can go have some lunch. Conor went up to 170 pounds. I mean, I'm just sharing for you, like, everything about this fight where you think maybe he can find a way out or he's going to take one. It's not there, and he's not the kind of guy that does that anyway. Daniel, I love that you told the story that when your fight with John Jones was off, the first thing you did is go and put something in your body. Let me tell you one. I was on an airplane headed to Vegas for the National Open, and the plane got turbulence. And I remember thinking, if this plane is going to go down, I'm not going down without that bag of peanuts. It would be a double loss. Now, if the plane doesn't land, I'm going to have to make weight, and I'm going to regret those peanuts. And you get in these really weird pushes and pulls. I fully understand how the first thing that you would do is go and get something. You're going to lose the fight, lose the paycheck, lose John Jones, and not eat those chicken strips. Come on, man. You're only human.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And I believe that most of the times when they don't take short notice fights, it's because of the weight. Like, I don't want to do this. Honestly, I'll be honest with you, Jill. These backup fighters who do ultimately go to the scale, get like Merab Dvalishvili at UFC 299, getting on the scale without the title fight, knowing he's won as much as he's done. These guys are so disciplined because I could only imagine how easy it would have been to just eat something whenever you don't have that world championship opportunity awaiting you at the end of the 3-month training camp. You know, Conor McGregor will fight Michael Chandler, at least to our knowledge right now, at the end of the month. But the start of June, and we didn't get to talk about this much last show because we had so much focus on the biggest news in the sport. Islam Makhachev last weekend. And I don't want to talk about the fight because we've all done that, right? We've all talked about the fight. We've all talked about the Dustin Poirier and how courageous he was and everything.
Yeah.
I want to talk about just the greatness of Islam Makhachev. That's it. The greatness of Islam Makhachev. When you watch him, Chael, when you watch him in the media, when you watch him in the build, do you get the feel that you are watching greatness? Because there are guys that you know you're watching greatness. When Anderson was rocking and rolling, you're like, man, this is greatness. George St. Pierre, this is greatness. Khabib Nurmagomedov, this is greatness. BJ Penn back in the day, you felt like you were witnessing greatness. Do you feel that when you see Islam Makhachev in his daily operations and when he steps inside the octagon?
Yeah, yes, I do, Daniel. And it comes from an iron will. It comes from a grit. I have not seen Islam use a technique, not a setup, not a combination, not a punch, kick, or anything grappling that I'm not familiar with. I've seen them all before. Calling a John Jones fight for Joe Rogan is one of the hardest things to do because John will use a technique that he made up in the ring right then, and it doesn't have a name. Now, I only tell you that because a lot of people are going to look at Islam, think it's very by the book. Going to think that this is a real blue-collar and blueprint workman-like style. I would agree, but do you know how fast he was at taking Poirier down, passing, and then going to that double wrist lock, that Kimura? That's the same thing that Islam finished Dan Hooker with real fast. And I'm just sharing, like, if you can get somebody that great as Dan Hooker or as Poirier, and finish them with a technique that they knew was coming. There's something really quite frightening about that. And it's a lot of the intangibles from Khabib and from his guys, such as their ability to weaponize pace. That's what becomes so intimidating. Before I put somebody head-to-head with Islam in my head and think they can deal with them, the first question I have to ask myself, can the person hold up? Can they go 25 minutes as hard as Islam? And for right now, partner, that answer is no.
Yes, the other day I was sitting at home and I texted, my broadcast partners, Joe and John, and I go, can you believe how quickly that darts choke got on to Dustin, right? Like how fast he went from putting him in it to putting him to sleep. Like in the 5th round, where they're both exhausted, they're both slippery, he actually fell asleep, Chael. That got so tight on him so quickly that he couldn't respond. This is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I think it's the greatness of Khabib, his father, and it all shows in Islam Makhachev. I watched the video today on Instagram, and it was Islam with Khabib's dad, and he goes, I had him since he was in 2nd grade. And you've seen it time and time again, man. Them just spending time together, getting better, winning Sambo World Championships, fighting in the UFC, fighting in promotions in Russia. It is one of the greatest stories that I have seen, because honestly, Chael, I don't know that those stories happen very often here. We don't have in fighting many instances where a guy walks into a gym as a 7-year-old and he stays with that person until he becomes a world champion. Ilia Topuria is another guy that did that, right? He has his coaches out in Spain. He went into their gym at 15 years old. They've worked him all the way to a world champion. You can't tell me that in the United States. We don't have that. We don't have those types of bonds between coach and athlete. So it's great to watch, and you get to see the greatness of the coach in the athlete, in the pupil. I watched Islam Makhachev go from a guy that had a ton of expectation on him to not only reaching that level of expectation, but exceeding it. It's hard, Chael. You and I both know when you're in Oregon and you're supposed to win 2 state championships, easy. It's going to be easy for Chael to win at least 2. When you walk on that mat to win the first of 2, you're very, very nervous. And in most cases, human beings fail in those moments. Islam has not only done that. Everybody said he's the next world champion. He became a world champion. And now he's defended the belt as many times as anyone has in UFC lightweight history.
Daniel, you've been in the room with them. You're teammates with these guys. And I know it's a tired question to make the comparison of Islam and Khabib or who's better. I get that that's tired, but I want to re-bring it up because you now have more evidence. They now have a common opponent. Not to mention, I think that's the best that Islam ever looked. To make believe like Islam's been in his prime when he won the belt or that he's in it now, man, there's some evidence that it's still out there, that he's still climbing and getting better. So if you had to compare Islam and Khabib right now based on what you've seen, how would you do it? Who would you give the edge to?
One thing that I think when you look at this comparison, and I mean, just look at this, dude. The dominance. I mean, 8 title fight wins, 28-1 in their UFC careers, 17 finishes. Like that's absurd. I don't know that Khabib. Yeah, he did. He beat Conor. He beat Dustin, and he beat Gaethje. Yeah, he defended 3 times. So, I don't know that it's fair to compare him, especially based on the common opponent, because I believe, Chael, that Dustin Poirier was better because he had the opportunity to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. He had felt that strength in grappling, a little bit of a recognition of what he would be facing when he got in the octagon. I was one of the people that said early, and I said, I think Islam Makhachev is more dangerous than Khabib because of his striking. But as I reflect on this, as a guy that's been in there with both, like you said, I don't know if we'll ever see anyone as dominant as Khabib. Because think about this, Chael. When did you ever watch a fight? Now, I'm not saying that Islam was losing the fight on Saturday. There were times, though, where it looked competitive. How often did you see Khabib Nurmagomedov not look outwardly dominant? That is where I think you make the difference. We don't know what would have happened if Khabib stayed for a while. But, as you said earlier, Chael, history tells us he'd probably still be holding on to that championship right now with about 8 or 9 title defenses and still kind of dominating the way that he did. So when I watch him, I think the dominance is different because Islam will stand with you more than Khabib was willing to. But it was in the idea that you knew exactly what Khabib Nurmagomedov was going to do to you, and nobody could stop it. With Islam, sure, you got more things to worry about. You got to worry about the striking. But with Khabib, he literally would tell you, I am going to take you down and maul you and beat you up, and no one could stop it. I don't know that we'll ever see anybody more dominant than him.
You know, Daniel, when people try to compare Jordan and LeBron, and they go with Jordan, that isn't just tipping your cap to nostalgia. That's not just comparing rings. What you're inadvertently doing is you're insulting the sport of basketball. You're saying that it peaked out 30 years ago. You're saying as a sport, it hasn't grown and gotten better. And the reason I tell you that, this isn't all moonlight and canoes for Khabib. I know people get nervous when they make this comparison, but quite frankly, Coach Khabib's either doing his job or he's not. You either get the student to where you were and you rise him above. You teach him everything that he knows, but also what you know, and you get him ahead of where you were. You either do your job or not. And I only tell you that because I do see a lot of guys hedging the bet and walking the fence and wanting to be polite to Khabib and his memory. Well, Khabib's memory is not done. He has now transitioned into a coach. So until Islam is emphatically better than Khabib, Khabib has not yet done his job. And I'm only telling you that because if we look at it from more of that perspective, I think people will be less nervous. I think they'll celebrate the idea. They'll celebrate some of the growth. They'll celebrate some of the combinations. You want to know what Islam did so well, and he showed it against Dustin, was his defense on his feet. He had head movement, and he was slipping shots and countering combinations. Islam never threw one punch, not in that whole fight. Everything. Had 2 and 3 at the same time. These are little chops, but they're chops in the right direction. And there is no insult to Khabib if somebody wants to say that Islam is doing better. I don't see him to that degree yet, but when it comes, we're not insulting fighter Khabib, we're complimenting Coach Khabib.
You know, I think that he would want nothing more in this world than for Islam to be viewed as better than he ever was. That is just what a coach does, but I just don't think we're there yet. And I really did reflect on this last couple of days, knowing that this was going to be part of the topic that we would discuss on the show. But I just think that just not yet. But I do believe he's as dominant. Hey, and guess what? If it's not yet, he's still a dominant world champion in the biggest fighting organization in the world. So, I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. Chael, you know, Islam Makhachev, in my mind, is the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. In a lot of people's minds, he's the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. In the UFC's rankings, he's number 1. In ESPN MMA's rankings, he's number 1. Pound for pound is literally the highest honor you can receive in mixed martial arts. While everybody's praising Islam for that performance on Saturday, Dana White had a little bit of a different opinion as to who he believes is the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Take a listen.
Yeah, I think he's, one of the greatest of all time. I think he's incredible. I don't think he's the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world. For anybody to call Islam the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world when John Jones is still fighting is nuts and shouldn't be ranking in the pound-for-pound or doing any of the rankings ever, if that's what you really think. John Jones has never lost a fight ever. He's fought all the baddest dudes in the world. And then when you think about what pound-for-pound rankings really mean, he moved it up to heavyweight and destroyed the best guy in the world. As long as John Jones is still fighting, active, and in the rankings, yeah, nobody's pound-for-pound best fighter in the world.
You know, when you look at the pound-for-pound rankings, Makhachev, Jones, Leon Edwards, Alex Pereira, and Ilia Topuria are the top 5, Chael. Look, what the boss is saying is very easy to agree with because John Jones has reigned atop that ranking system for a very long time. But when you put everything on paper, when you look at who Islam beat in Alexander Volkanovski, who was an absolute world beater, when you look at Islam Makhachev winning the fight that he did over Charles Oliveira, now Dustin Poirier, it's easy to understand why so many of us feel he is the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. My question to you is this, though. Do you believe that John Jones today, at 37, 38 years old, is still the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world?
Yeah, I've seen no evidence otherwise. I don't have him as the greatest of all time. I believe that to be George St. Pierre. And generally, I do like to see a person on this list, Daniel, that is active. Now, John is still the undisputed champion. I want to definitely show him grace while he's injured. I don't want to be my typical jerk of a self towards John. I just look at it and go, I get Dana's point. I get where being dynamic comes into play. You know, rest his soul, but Khabib's father once said, no matter how good an athlete gets, John Jones is still going to be there, meaning that was the ultimate bar and nobody was going to surpass him. I think that John's days at heavyweight, I thought they were going to have some real opportunity, but it didn't happen in his one and only foray. He went in a world heavyweight title fight and didn't even get hit, and he was taken on a striker. I mean, not for nothing. It's very difficult to go against him. I do like an active guy. I won't bring St. Pierre into this, same as I won't bring Daniel Cormier into this. If guys aren't out there and competing, I think that they're off limits from this list, but John does technically have a license. I think he's still fair game. I admit he's pretty good.
You know, he is. You know, John Jones atop that list doesn't really, it wouldn't surprise me. But at the end of the day, when those guys went to fight in Australia, in Perth, and Alexander Volkanovski was universally considered the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and Dana said, whoever wins this fight will be the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Islam won that fight. And then Islam beat him again to prove that at 145 and 155, two weight classes, he's the best in the world. That is what it is. I get it. John Jones has beaten the best. But we haven't really had the opportunity to see John Jones against the best right now. Because since 2021, you saw the graphic, right? Islam Makhachev has, I don't know, 8, 9 fights, 4 championship fights. John Jones has 1 fight. And there it's right here. Right? He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 fights to 1. I mean, so I don't know if the John Jones of today is the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, because I haven't seen enough of him to know if he's the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. That's just the truth. Islam Makhachev is the number 1 guy in the world. And we got the...
Dale, if I could just jump in there. I mean, there's other stats and numbers. When you said that pound for pound is the ultimate thing that we have in our sport, to back up your thought, it's the ultimate thing because it's peer-reviewed. Like, that's not a title or a tournament you can go win. It's a whole bunch of experts, your own peers, sitting back and looking around and go, that guy's the best. I've been in a lot of rooms before, a lot of workout rooms. I don't ever have to touch certain guys. They can be on the other side. They can be working out. I can be distracted. 1 hour later, we will all know who the baddest dude in that room is. We will, even if you didn't see a guy or touch a guy, you can feel it, and we all... No, and it's a big compliment. And I want to tell you this. I don't fully agree with, just as a general thought, but I don't fully agree with the numbers our community looks to. It's the same as the Jordan versus LeBron, and people talk about 6 rings versus 5 once upon a time. You're comparing resumes, and I don't know that that's the same. I think when you're looking at these numbers, it's a little more important. Just for example, let's take Islam's last 10 opponents. Let's take Jones's last 10 opponents. Let's not look at who beat them. Let's look at who lost more rounds. And the rounds that they lost, what were those guys ranked that were taking rounds from them? And while it might sound like I'm splitting hairs, you have to. This is a game of inches. I really think that that's something you need to look toward. I have seen guys go into world title fights that not only they won their last contest, but they lost their last 4 rounds. I think it's more relevant. Tony Ferguson, who I'm very close with, but I wasn't as concerned when people said he lost 5 in a row or 6 in a row. I was more concerned that he lost his last 27 rounds, and nobody spoke about that. And for me, that was a lot more alarming, or something that you need to look at. So I'm not all for the finish and the knockout and the KO, and it has to be this, and the championship rings like Jordan and LeBron. I think that there's other ways to look a little bit closer. I haven't done that math, but if I was to look at their last 5 fights and find out between Islam and John who lost more rounds, I think Islam has the advantage there.
Yeah, he doesn't lose very many rounds in. It was a very competitive fight last weekend, and he didn't lose many rounds in that fight either. And I think that he is a victim to his dominance and the expectation of what the fights will look like when he gets in there, because he's been so good. Now, Chair, what that leads me to is, what's next? Because we always want to move forward. Islam Makhachev said, I'd like to fight Leon Edwards or Bilal Muhammad. Leon Edwards said at some point, it will be a fight that I would like to entertain. But Arman Sarukian, bro, is not looking to allow for Islam Makhachev to move past him. He said, congrats to Islam, but don't try to run away to another division. You've only defended the belt once against a real lightweight. I'm next in line. But that wasn't it, though, because Arman Tsarukyan's been on a bit of a interview deal and said that the guy that showed up last weekend, he would finish. He said that if Islam Makhachev that showed up last weekend would show up to fight him, it would be a very easy fight. So is Arman Tsarukyan clearly next for the lightweight champion Islam Makhachev?
I think at 155 pounds, and I don't know that it's because of everything that Arman's done, which, by the way, is a lot, and he is really great, and he's got the ranking, but I don't think that's what it is. No other 155-pounder is trying to contest that. I mean, right, this is a battle in the media. You were smack dab in the middle of this with your comments that you made about Islam versus Justin Gaethje, who was getting ready to take on Chandler, and Gaethje wanted his fight with Chandler to be a #1 contendership. I mean, I'll just remind you, those two fought it out, and they battled hard through the media and for the opportunity, and one of them came out. I mean, there's a reason that this press conference in Ireland was such a big deal, and we're all so let down. Words matter. Controlling a stage and a narrative and having the mandate of the masses is the single most important thing that you can have as a fighter. It's far more important than your record. And I'm only telling you that there's not a 55-pounder out there who has spoken up. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Everybody has laid down, stood back, and said, Mr. Tsarukyan, walk on through. We will all be waiting around when you're done. So yes, by that product, as long as Islam doesn't leave the division, of which he didn't do a good enough job of making a compelling case, and it's not as though Leon's going to call for him, by that deduction, yes. You know what, Dan, I got to tell you, I'm playing along a little bit here. What are we doing? I'm not whole and I'm not complete. Maybe you are, but I'm not. I'm not ready to be done with this press conference and this Ireland yet and our speculation. May I go back to that, or do you want to keep talking about who's fighting Islam next?
I wanted to talk about who's fighting Islam
All right,
next.
I'll play along if you want, but a lot of times I get asked these questions. Like, I get viewed as an insider because I do this product with you and we're put on the worldwide leader. I don't usually have all that much inside information. But as I sit back and I look at that, I'm left with one question. Why cancel the press conference? And if I ask that rhetorical question, I'll have people answer it. They'll say, well, Conor, or, I'm hearing that he's hurt or he's injured. It's like, no, let me stop. Why cancel the press conference? And they'll go back to it. Well, we don't know what Conor's doing. And he put out a press release and he made it clear that, why cancel the press conference? Stop saying the word Conor. It's not as though we haven't held events or press conferences where one of the guys didn't show up. It's not as though Dana White and George St. Pierre with a beautiful belt didn't interview an empty chair once upon a time, which is the first time the UFC, who was on Fox, got on SportsCenter in 9 months. Not for nothing, no press can create some pretty good press. I, in the Mecca of Madison Square Garden, stood opposite Vanderlei Silva,
what is
who,
this?
by the way,
what
didn't show up. He missed his flight. He called in via Zoom. You still hold the press conference, and I only bring that to you. That is, for sure, as we put our detective hats on, the single most compelling question of the whole thing. Why did this show not go on? And that, partner, I don't have an answer to.
Okay, all right. Arman Tsarukyan for me is next for Islam Makhachev because I'm going to do what they tell me to do. But Conor McGregor posted a video, a picture. Conor posted a picture in the hospital. He looks pretty happy. He looks like he's unbothered. But I mean, when you've got $500 million, I don't know how much can bother you if you're Conor McGregor. He seems like a guy that's healthy. I don't know, Chael. You know what's the craziest thing about the whole Conor McGregor thing is? Most times, you don't have a press conference that is just a standalone press conference. Normally, the press conference happens the fight of the week, the week of the fight. Everybody shows up on a Wednesday. We all get dressed up as nice as we can, and we take questions from the fans. The only time you get standalone press conferences is when you don't have a fight. It's when you have an event. The only time you have an event in the UFC is when Conor McGregor is involved. Chael, which leads me to this. If there's an injury, if there's something that got banged up, say Conor's not feeling good, we would have never known. And we were never supposed to know. Because at this point, he would have just been in training camp, or the rest of us would all just be in training camp with no press conference scheduled. His importance makes it to where people are questioning whether or not the fight's going to happen. But again, it's awesome to know that he still has that type of star power and that type of star quality. But keep your fingers crossed because we want to keep this this fight together. Chael, my friend, this show has been so fun to do. I appreciate you, man. It's been great. But next week, we're off. We have no shows, and that's because you are in Brazil fighting Anderson Silva. We ain't got much time, Chael. Run through what you want to say as you head out.
Oh, you got the left hands and the right hands. I mean, this isn't rocket science. I really don't know about it. We're going to go out there and we're going to fight. This is the only opportunity I had to fight him. I mean, if I had one choice, I could either fight him or not fight him. I go the rest of my life, I get to punch him or I don't get to punch him. I'm going to choose to do it. They can set up whatever the rules they want. Man, I've never followed the rules in the first place. I'm coming home a winner. Remember I said that.
My man Chael Sonnen. Guys, every Monday and Thursday, get us wherever you get your podcast. We're off next week. Hey, Chael's getting paid. I'm getting paid not to work. It don't get no better, baby.